Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. The setup: I live in one of those modern duplex houses where they build two homes side by side with mirrored layouts. We share a wall but are otherwise completely separate units. The architecture is typical of new suburban developments. Clean lines, neutral colors, and just enough yard space to make you feel like you have some privacy. For 5 years, the house next to me belonged to Mrs. Chen, a retired teacher who you barely noticed was there. She tended to her small garden, played classical piano quietly in the afternoons, and always gave out the best candy during Halloween. When she passed away in early 2023 and the house was sold, that's when everything went sideways. Enter Mike Torres, my new neighbor-adjacent nightmare. Mike owns Torres Construction LLC and dabbles in real estate investments on the side. Within weeks of buying the house, he turned it into what I can only describe as an unofficial boarding house for his workers. They're just temporary residents, he told me with a dismissive wave when I first asked about the constant stream of new faces. All properly documented workers, if that's what you're worried about. But word around the neighborhood suggested otherwise. Several other contractors mentioned that Torres was known for hiring undocumented workers, paying them well below minimum wage by claiming they were being paid according to their home country's rates. Classic wage theft scheme, really. He stuffed 4 to 6 workers into this 3-bedroom house at any given time. The real problem started around Thursday nights and wouldn't let up until Monday morning. The bass from their music would literally make my coffee cup vibrate on my desk. "Hey, could you guys turn it down a bit?" I asked one Thursday night in September, after 3 consecutive weekends of what felt like living next to a nightclub. Yes, no problem," one of the workers said, nodding enthusiastically. We turned down. They didn't. The next weekend, I tried again. "Look, guys, I can hear your music over my own TV, even with headphones on." "Is not so loud," came the response, accompanied by shrugs. "Maybe your wall's too thin?" After 6 attempts at being neighborly, I finally contacted Torres directly. "Listen," I said during our phone call, "the noise levels are getting out of hand." His response was quick and crude. "Not my problem, buddy. They pay rent. They can do what they want. Don't like it? Move." That's when I started calling the police. Over the next 2 months, I must have made at least 15 noise complaints. The police would show up, the music would go down, and 20 minutes after they left, we'd be back to square one. What Torres didn't know was that I'm a construction and permit lawyer. I could have pursued legal action about the noise, but I knew it would just lead to a game of cat and mouse. They'd turn down the music when authorities showed up, then crank it back up the moment they left. I needed something more substantial. Little did I know, Torres was about to hand me exactly what I needed on a silver platter. Part 2. The Mistake. It was a regular Tuesday morning in October 2023 when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of heavy machinery next door. Through my home office window, I watched in disbelief as a crane started tearing down part of a wall. Some context. Between our properties stood a shared wall that was part of a small outbuilding constructed years ago. During the original property division, both homeowners had agreed to use this wall as part of the boundary line, sharing ownership and maintenance costs. It was all properly documented, something Torres clearly hadn't bothered to check. I threw on a jacket and walked outside to investigate. The workers had already demolished most of the outbuilding, leaving only the shared boundary wall, though they'd managed to damage its upper section in the process. "Who authorized this work?" I asked one of the crew members. "Mr. Torres," he replied, barely glancing at me. "We're demolishing old structure, build new one." "Do you have a permit for this?" The worker just shrugged and went back to work. I knew 2 things with absolute certainty. First, this type of demolition required city approval and proper permits. Second, having checked the public permit database just last week for a client's case in the area, I knew Torres hadn't filed anything. The workers moved all the storage from the demolished outbuilding onto the lawn, covering everything with a blue tarp that flapped noisily in the wind. Real professional. I waited 3 days, watching as they cleared debris. Then, when new construction materials started arriving and they began laying foundation work, I made my move. "Good morning," I wrote in an email to the municipal authorities. "I'm writing to report unauthorized construction work at 1542 Maple Street. I attached photos and my contact information." The city responded quickly. Apparently, they'd already warned Torres once about the demolition, and he'd promised to stop work until he had proper permits. He'd lied, of course. That evening, my phone rang. Torres's name flashed on the screen. "You rat bastard!" he shouted without preamble. "You reported me to the city." "Mr. Torres," I replied calmly, "if someone reported unauthorized construction work, they were well within their rights to do so." I'll sue you for damages. Do you know how much these delays are costing me? That would be interesting, I said, considering you're the one breaking the law. Have a good evening. I hung up, smiling to myself. Torres had no idea what he'd just stepped into. In trying to save a few bucks by skipping permits, he'd walked right into a bureaucratic nightmare of my making. And I was just getting started. Part 3, the Kraken. Most people don't realize just how complex construction permit regulations are. It's like a maze designed by a committee of sadistic bureaucrats who get paid by the paragraph, miss one checkbox on page 234, subsection D, start over, forget to initial the margin on Form B-147, rejected. I did some research into the property records and found gold. The previous owners, Mrs. Chen and her neighbors, had formally documented their shared ownership of the wall. Every repair, every modification, all jointly approved and paid for, which meant Torres had just damaged property I partially owned. When Torres finally submitted his permit application in November 2023, I reviewed it immediately. Sure enough, his plans included major modifications to our shared wall. Excuse me, I said, walking into the city planning office. I'd like to file a formal objection to permit application TR 2023-487. The clerk looked up from her computer. Grounds? The applicant requires co-owner permission for modifications to a shared boundary structure. He doesn't have it. And you're the co-owner? I am. I slid the documentation across her desk. Torres must have pulled some strings because despite my rock-solid objection, the city approved his permit 2 weeks later. Guess you're not as smart as you think, Torres gloated over the phone. Permits approved. Construction starts Monday. Interesting, I replied. Have you heard of the Regional Planning Appeals Board? The what? You'll find out. I paid my €100 appeal fee the next day. Unlike the local officials Torres had charmed, the regional board couldn't care less about his connections. They dealt purely in regulations and compliance. The appeal process dragged on through winter and into spring 2024. Meanwhile, Torres's workers were living with their belongings either in storage or under that increasingly weathered tarp. The house was becoming more run down by the day, with the unfinished construction project turning the backyard into something resembling an abandoned work site. Look, Torres said during an unexpected visit in March, his previous arrogance notably absent. What do you want? Name your price. I'm not interested in selling my rights to the wall. Be reasonable. This is killing my business. Not my fucking problem, I replied, closing the door. But the permit situation was just the appetizer. The main course was the criminal investigation into his unauthorized construction work. See, in our jurisdiction, building without permits isn't just a civil violation. It's a criminal offense. And Torres had used his own company to do the illegal work. During a neighborhood association meeting, I overheard that Torres tried to unload the property. But who wants to buy a house with an active building code violation and unresolved criminal charges, especially when any future development would require permission from an uncooperative neighbor, me, regarding that shared wall? His business reputation took a hit too. City inspectors suddenly became very interested in all of Torres Construction's ongoing projects. Funny how one violation can trigger such thorough oversight. Part 4. The Aftermath. By summer 2024, Torres's little empire was crumbling. The Regional Planning Appeals Board not only upheld my objection, but also found additional violations in his original permit application. This triggered a complete review of the project, requiring new architectural drawings, structural engineering reports, and environmental impact assessments. The workers? Long gone. Can't house your underpaid labor force when your property becomes the subject of regular code enforcement visits. Plus, the constant official scrutiny made his questionable employment practices too risky to maintain. The house sat empty except for Torres's occasional inspections. The once pristine lawn was now a patch of dead grass and construction debris. That blue tarp, now sun-bleached and torn, still fluttered sadly in the wind, a monument to his hubris. In August, I received a thick envelope from Torres's lawyer. Inside was a comprehensive proposal. Torres would sell the property, but needed my written agreement regarding the shared wall to facilitate the sale. In exchange, he offered a significant sum and a legally binding noise restriction covenant that would apply to all future owners. I let the letter sit on my desk for 2 weeks before responding. Dear Mr. Torres, I wrote, I appreciate your offer. However, I'll need to review this with my legal team. I'm sure you understand, given the complexity of shared property rights and the ongoing regulatory issues. I'll get back to you within 90 days. The house finally sold in October 2024 at a substantial loss. The new owners? A retired couple who spent their first week meticulously reviewing the property's permit history and meeting with neighbors to discuss renovation plans. They even invited me over to discuss the shared wall situation over tea. Torres? Last I heard, his construction company was under investigation by the Department of Labor. Apparently, someone, not me this time, tipped them off about his wage practices. The music has stopped. The constant parade of workers is gone. My coffee cup sits still on my desk, undisturbed by bass vibrations. Mrs. Chen's old piano room is being restored by the new owners, who mentioned they have a granddaughter taking lessons. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't some dramatic confrontation. Sometimes, it's just knowing exactly which forms to file, which regulations to cite, and which bureaucratic wheels to set in motion. Then you just sit back and watch the system you know so well do what it was designed to do. I still have all the documentation from this ordeal filed away, just in case, but somehow, I don't think I'll need it anymore. The monster of bureaucracy, once awakened, has a way of perpetuating itself. As for that shared wall, it's still standing, properly permitted and jointly maintained, just as it should be. The next one is an entitled people's story. I never thought I'd be writing one of these posts, but here we are. This whole mess started about 8 months ago when I inherited my grandfather's off-grid cabin and the 5 acres it sits on. The property is located in a beautiful wooded area in northern Michigan, about 2 hours from where I live. My grandfather bought this land back in 1975 and built the cabin himself. It's completely off-grid with solar panels, a well, and a septic system. The cabin sits at the end of a private road, and while there are other properties nearby, it's pretty secluded. The whole area has about 30 homes spread across 200 acres, with most lots being 3-5 acres each. When my grandfather passed away last year, he left me the property in his will. I was thrilled because I'd spent countless summers there as a kid, helping him maintain the place and learning about living off the grid. The property taxes are paid up, and I have all the original deeds and documentation. Here's where the drama begins. About 3 months after inheriting the place, I started getting letters from this homeowners association I'd never heard of, the Pine Ridge Property Owners Association. They claimed my grandfather's lot was actually common property that belonged to all homeowners in the area, and they demanded I cease unauthorized occupation of the land. I called my grandfather's lawyer, who handled his estate, and he confirmed there was no homeowners association when my grandfather bought the property. Apparently, this homeowners association formed in 1990, long after my grandfather's purchase, and some of the newer homeowners had joined it. I wrote back to the homeowners association board president, Karen, yes, really, explaining that my property predated their association and providing copies of the deed and property records. I thought that would be the end of it. Nope. Karen showed up at my cabin one weekend when I was doing maintenance work. She had this condescending smile that made my blood boil. "Hi there," she said, standing on my driveway like she owned the place. "I'm Karen Matthews, the Homeowners Association president. We need to discuss your illegal occupation of common property." I remained calm. "This isn't common property. I have the deed right here." I pulled out a folder with copies of all the documentation. She barely glanced at them. "Those documents are outdated. When the Homeowners Association formed, all undeveloped lots were designated as common property. Your grandfather never registered this lot properly with us." "He didn't need to," I replied. "He owned this land 15 years before your homeowners association existed. This property isn't part of your association." "Well," she said, crossing her arms, "we'll see about that. The board has already voted to reclaim this lot for community use. We're planning to build a playground and picnic area here." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You can't just vote to take someone's private property. That's not how this works." She turned to leave but stopped and looked back. "Oh, and by the way, that solar array violates our aesthetic guidelines. It'll need to come down." The harassment escalated from there. The homeowners association started fining me for unauthorized modifications to community property. They sent letters threatening legal action. Some members even started parking their cars at the entrance to my driveway, blocking access to my property. I documented everything and installed security cameras around the property. Then I contacted a lawyer who specializes in property law and homeowners association disputes. After reviewing my case, he was practically giddy. "This is one of the most clear-cut cases of homeowners association overreach I've ever seen," he said. "They have absolutely zero claim to your property. Not only that, but their actions constitute harassment and could be grounds for significant damages. We filed a lawsuit against the homeowners association for harassment, attempted conversion of property, and numerous other violations." The initial hearing was scheduled for last week. The day of the hearing, I walked into the courthouse with my lawyer, Mike, feeling confident but nervous. Karen was there with the Homeowners Association's attorney, looking smug as ever. She'd brought along several board members who kept glaring at me like I was some kind of criminal. The judge, an older woman named Judge Martinez, didn't waste any time getting to the point. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," she said, reviewing the documents. "The Homeowners Association is claiming ownership of a property that was purchased and developed 15 years before the Homeowners Association even existed?" The Homeowners Association's lawyer cleared his throat. "Your Honor, when the association was formed, there was an agreement that all undeveloped—" Judge Martinez cut him off. "Counselor, I'm looking at photographs of a cabin that tax records show was built in 1976. Are you suggesting this was undeveloped land in 1990? The structure wasn't properly registered with—" "That's not what I asked," the judge interrupted again. "Mr. Thompson, can you tell me about the property's history?" I explained how my grandfather had built the cabin, showed photos from different decades proving its existence, and presented all the original documentation. Karen couldn't contain herself and stood up. "Your Honor, he's violating our community standards. That solar array is an eyesore and a—" "Miss Matthews," Judge Martinez said sharply, "sit down. You have no authority over this property, none. This lot was never part of your homeowners association and you can't retroactively claim it." The next hour was essentially the judge systematically dismantling every homeowners association argument, but the best part came when she reviewed the documentation of their harassment. "These actions are unconscionable," she declared. "Blocking access to private property, issuing fraudulent fines, and attempting to convert privately owned land through false claims of authority. This court finds the homeowners association's actions not just baseless but potentially criminal." The judgment was better than I could have hoped for. The Homeowners Association was ordered to pay $50,000 in damages for harassment and attempted property conversion issue, a formal written retraction of all claims to my property, pay all my legal fees, cease any and all attempts to regulate or interfere with my property. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. But it got even better. Judge Martinez wasn't done. "Furthermore," she continued, "I'm ordering an investigation into this homeowners association's practices. If I find evidence of similar behavior toward other property owners, there will be serious consequences." After the hearing, I overheard Karen arguing with their lawyer in the hallway. "This is ridiculous," she was saying. "How are we supposed to maintain property values with that hippie solar cabin making us look like some kind of commune?" The lawyer just shook his head. "Be thankful he's not pressing criminal charges. My advice, stay far away from his property." I thought that would be the end of it, but Karen and the Homeowners Association had one last surprise for me. The next weekend, I drove up to the cabin and found about 20 people having a picnic on my land. Karen was there, directing people where to set up tables. I called the police immediately and started recording on my phone. "What do you think you're doing?" I asked Karen. She smiled that infuriating smile. "Oh, we're just exercising our right to peaceful assembly. You can't stop us from using common areas." The police arrived quickly. The responding officer, thankfully, was familiar with property law and wasn't buying Karen's argument. "Ma'am," he said, "this is private property. You were just in court over this exact issue. If you don't leave immediately, you'll be arrested for criminal trespass." "But," Karen started. "No buts," the officer cut her off. "Pack up and leave now or you're going to jail." As they were leaving, I heard one of the other homeowners association members say to Karen, "Maybe we should just leave him alone. This is getting expensive." I immediately called my lawyer again, and we filed for a restraining order. The judge granted it the next day, barring Karen and all Homeowners Association board members from coming within 100 feet of my property. But I wasn't done. Remember that investigation the judge ordered? Well, it turned up some interesting findings. The investigation revealed a pattern of the Homeowners Association attempting to seize properties that predated their association. They'd successfully intimidated 3 other homeowners into joining the Homeowners Association against their will, using similar tactics of harassment and false claims of authority. One elderly couple, the Andersons, had actually sold their home at a loss just to escape the harassment. They'd owned their property since 1978, but the Homeowners Association had made their lives miserable with false fines and threats until they gave up and moved. My lawyer immediately contacted the Andersons and the other affected property owners. Within weeks, we had a class action lawsuit on our hands. The local news got wind of the story, and suddenly our quiet property dispute was making headlines. Rogue Homeowners Association attempts land grab of private properties. The district attorney's office got involved after reviewing the evidence. It turned out Karen and several board members had been embezzling homeowners association funds, using the money for personal expenses while claiming it was for community improvements. They'd been hoping to seize my property and several others to build luxury homes and pocket the profits from their sale. One morning, about 2 months after our court victory, I was having coffee on my cabin's porch when several police cars pulled up to Karen's house down the road. I watched through binoculars as she was led out in handcuffs, still wearing her bathrobe and arguing with the officers. The charges were serious: attempted grand theft, fraud, embezzlement, and criminal conspiracy. 5 other board members were also arrested. The DA's office estimated they'd stolen over $300,000 from homeowners association funds over the past 3 years. The class action lawsuit was settled out of court for $2.1 million, split between all the affected property owners. The Andersons were able to buy back their old property, which had fallen into disrepair under the new owners. The Homeowners Association's insurance company, after reviewing the evidence, refused to cover the settlement, leaving the board members personally liable. Karen and her co-conspirators eventually plea bargained. She got 3 years in prison and had to pay substantial restitution. The other board members received varying sentences, mostly probation and fines. The Homeowners Association itself was dissolved by court order. The legitimate members formed a new, much smaller association that only includes properties that actually agreed to join. Their new bylaws explicitly recognize and protect the rights of non-member property owners. As for my cabin, I've made some improvements. I expanded the solar array, making it even more visible just because I can, built a greenhouse, and started a small organic garden. Some of my neighbors who were previously hostile have actually become friendly, asking for advice about installing their own solar systems. The Andersons moved back in last month. Yesterday they came over for dinner, and we sat on the porch watching the sunset. Mrs. Anderson raised her glass in a toast. "To good neighbors and bad homeowners associations getting what they deserve," she said with a smile. "I've started teaching weekend workshops at the cabin about off-grid living and sustainable housing. The irony isn't lost on me that the property Karen tried to claim as a community resource is now actually benefiting the community, just not in the way she intended." Last week, I received a letter from Karen's daughter, apologizing for her mother's behavior and asking if she could attend one of my workshops. I agreed, of course. Change happens one person at a time. The best part, I recently learned that my grandfather had anticipated something like this might happen. In his journals, which I found in the cabin's attic, he wrote about refusing to join the Homeowners Association when it formed, saying, "Some folks can't stand seeing others live freely. They'll try to control what they don't understand. Stand your ground, keep your deeds in order, and remember, good fences make good neighbors." Thanks, Grandpa. Lesson learned. Update 6 months later. The ripple effects of our case continue to spread. The state legislature is now considering a bill, nicknamed the Anti-Karen Act, that would strengthen protections for property owners against homeowners association overreach. I've been asked to testify at the hearings next month. Karen's daughter attended 3 of my workshops and is now helping me develop a curriculum for sustainable living. She's become one of my strongest advocates, speaking publicly about how homeowners association abuse affected her family and the importance of property rights. The Andersons have fully restored their property and started their own solar installation business. We've partnered to offer free consultations to anyone looking to break free from the grid. As for that playground Karen wanted to build, we're building one anyway, on a genuine community lot that was properly purchased and designated for public use. The difference is this one will be solar-powered, sustainable, and truly open to everyone. Grandpa's cabin stands as a testament to independence and the importance of standing up for what's right. The solar panels gleam in the sunlight, a beacon of freedom in a world that sometimes tries too hard to control everything. And Karen? I heard she's taking a gardening class in prison. Maybe there's hope for everyone after all. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.